So a surrogate's court, it's like you think of a surrogate mother. The court appoints someone to take the place of someone else. And that's how we get into inheritance. So if someone dies, we appoint someone to be head of the estate, to sort of act in their place and do whatever that person would have done to manage their affairs had they still been living. So think of it as a sort of we appoint a substitute. That's sort of what we do, and that expands not just to estates, but what I do specifically here, which is adoptions and guardianships. We do private adoptions, which is very similar to what family court does, and we do adoptions and we do guardianships for incapacitated adults. So again, we appoint someone to be able to care for someone else the way that they would if they were able to. Okay, so that being said, that's where I work. And what I do is I'm a court attorney and I basically am the head of the guardianship department. So any adoption or adult guardianship that passes through this court, which is a lot because it's Manhattan and we're very populated, I have to oversee everything, make sure that everything is ready to go before it goes to the judge and we do any appointing or assigning or, whether or not there's a hearing, that kind of thing. So how did I get here? Um, I went to law school. I went to Fordham. I went to undergrad and law school, like one right after another. I didn't even want to give myself the opportunity of getting cold feet. So I did undergrad. I went straight into law school. I started in the night division because I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do. And then after I did the first year, sort of part time, I transferred into the day division pretty smoothly. So I went to Fordham Law. I graduated in '08, which was basically the peak of the recession. It was the financial crisis of '08, and I think that that's important to mention because I don't know specifically where anybody else on this call is at in their life, but it seems to be that we're headed to another time of transition. A lot of people have changed jobs because of the pandemic. They changed locations. So I think that people are sort of refiguring out what they need to do or just figuring out maybe for the first time how to get started. So I think it's important for you to know that I graduated at a time where promised jobs got lost, where you had to really think on your feet and try to find something before you figured out what your next two steps were going to be. So I graduated at a time of transition. And the first job that I got was actually a fellowship with Fordham Law. And I learned how to do a little bit of sort of event management, really, and some contract review. I did anything that they would ask me to on that fellowship. So you sort of had your hands in many different things. You try to make yourself useful, and whatever it is, you learn a little bit. So I did a little bit of contract review. And then when that fellowship ended, thankfully, I was able to find a position it was a boutique law firm. So what that means is it's not big corporate law. It was a smaller group, which is why you call it a boutique, and it specialized in trusts and estates. So I thought that it was a good fit at the time. One, because I really, really, really needed a job and they were going to hire me. So that's done. And second is because there was a lot of paperwork review. And that's something that I was used to doing from the fellowship. So I thought that would work out in that way. So what I did was it was a lot of client contact for a trust and estates firm that's boutique size. You had the client population that I got used to in that position was an elderly client population. And that was, that was a good learning experience for me. The elderly community is a very specific community to deal with. They are older. They don't have great health. They have a lot of time to focus on certain things. There's a lot of things that they don't understand that you have to simply repeat to them until they are more, not just knowledgeable of the subject, but I think a little bit more trusting of you as the attorney to be able to help them accomplish their goal. So that was a very, very unique skill that I learned there. And then, that was added to the fact that I was able to review a lot of documents. So I learned a lot about will drafting. I learned a lot, like I just said, about dealing with elderly clients. But eventually I had to move on. I couldn't stay because they couldn't offer me an associate position. And I understood it was just not, not the right place, not the right time. So I transferred from that boutique firm to another boutique firm, which was products liability, which meant we represented people who were suing pharmaceutical companies. So why on earth would I make a change from trust and estates to products liability? It doesn't seem like it has too much of a bridge, but it did. They hired me at the products liability firm, one, because there was a lot of paperwork to review. And by that time, you develop an even sharper eye for detail. And two, because the clients were suing pharmaceutical companies, they were a population that was ill. And they actually wanted someone that had experience dealing with people that were sick because it's a very unique kind of client. You have to go out of your way to make certain things happen. They can't always come to you, and they're not always in the best of shape when you're talking to them. So they, I think, thought that my transferable skill, or at least one of them, was that I had dealt with people that had been ill before. So I did work at a products liability firm doing basically litigation support for about a year and change. And then I got laid off, which was a bit of a blow because, again, I was a newer attorney and I was really just trying to figure out what it was that I enjoyed the most, trying to identify my weaknesses in each position to figure out, how what the next position that I would even try to entertain would be able to do in terms of making me enhance my skills. So I got laid off, and I was laid off for 4 months. And there was a point where I thought it was going to be like the end of the world because I really wasn't finding anything. And I was very young. Not that I'm old now, but I was much younger. And I was like, oh my God, I just graduated law school. I have all of these rules in my head. Here I am with this fresh degree, and no one's gonna hire me. I can't find anything. And for me, 4 months seemed like the longest time in the world. So 4 months later, I actually went to, at that time, what was a staffing agency specifically for attorneys. So I think it was called the Clutch Group, if I remember correctly. So I went to a staffing agency specifically for attorneys because I was struggling trying to find employment. Um, and I got a temporary position at a nonprofit organization. I was in this temporary position for a few months. I was covering for somebody who went on paternity leave, and they were taking an extended leave for several other reasons. So I was only supposed to be there for a few months. And I wasn't really 100% comfortable with it because it was litigation. And even in law school, I didn't think I was the litigation type. I was more of the contract review type. And all they did was litigation. So there I went. I said yes because I really needed to be employed. So I went into that nonprofit, and I wound up staying there for 7 years. So I went in. Not only did I discover that litigation wasn't so opposed to me, and I wasn't so opposed to it, but when you work for a nonprofit, you have the advantage of wearing many hats. You need to figure it out on your own. And because it was a nonprofit, we dealt with people who were terminally ill, Again, they were specifically looking for somebody who had experience dealing with people who were more difficult, honestly, because they were sick, and in this case, chronically ill. We had funding to work with cancer patients, HIV patients, things like that. So they wanted someone who had the people skill, that particular people skill, someone who was detail oriented, and someone who'd be willing to litigate, which, as of the time of the interview, I said I was, and that became true. So what hats did I wear while I was at this nonprofit? I wore many. I did matrimonial law, which I loved. I did family law, which is custody, visitation, a separate court than matrimonial, but still considered family law. So matrimonial and family. I did a lot of landlord tenant. We represented tenants. And I did a little bit of trust and estates. The nonprofit families that we worked with were usually low income, vulnerable New York City families, and they didn't have a huge amount of money, but trust and estates issues don't necessarily um, pertain to people who have a lot of money. It actually, you can have an estate issue no matter what socioeconomic tier you come from. So I had at that point a little bit of T&E experience, which they loved. That's what I got at the boutique T&E firm. T&E firm, and I had experience dealing with the sick and elderly, which I got from the boutique and then from the products liability firm. And and then I was willing to take on a litigation job, and the litigation really covered all those areas of the law that I just mentioned: family, landlord, tenant, all of it. So I stayed there for the next 6 years, and that was really crucial to me in figuring out what I liked, what I loved, and what I did not think that I would want to do again if and when I ever left that position. So it turns out that I really liked trust and estates, that I really liked matrimonial, and I wasn't a fan of what I did the most, which was actually landlord tenant. And I'll let you guys know the reason why I didn't like it is because I personally didn't think that the arguments had a lot of flavor. You have time for money, money for time for money, money for time. And that's, you jiggled it, but those were sort of the parameters. Matrimonial has a technical element, it has a financial element, but it also has that family element. So to me, it just seemed like a more dimensional problem, which you can delve into. So that's how I knew I liked it. And the same thing went for trust and estates. You think of it as being, maybe a little bit more financial, but you tell me how high tensions get when you're disinheriting someone and they're finding out. So there's a lot of family dynamic, a lot in trust and estates work, but it's with a good mix of technicality and with detail to paper. So where are we? I'm at the nonprofit. So I worked for the nonprofit, and then I was able to sort of scale the ladder a little bit. I started as a staff attorney, and by the time I left, I was general counsel there. So I did a lot to help develop the legal department in that nonprofit, and I learned a lot about funding, and how dependent certain programs are on funding, and what the alternatives are or lack of when funding runs out, or funding, your grant ends, and then what do you do? So I learned a lot about funding. I learned a lot about working with families that come from generation upon generation of dysfunction. And then in addition, they're sick. So it was very, very heavy when it came to client interaction, probably the heaviest that I had had up until that time. So, but that's nothing but a good thing. If anything, that's going to make you an excellent attorney. So a lot of direct contact, a lot of learning of the law, and a lot of being flexible and wearing many hats. Let's see. So when I was at that nonprofit, I think after being there for a few years, like I said, I realized what it was that I sort of had more of a vibe with and what I didn't have a vibe with. So my next change came basically because I had my firstborn. I have two kids now. But I had my firstborn, and then I decided that I needed to find something where the hours were more conducive to my establishment of a work life balance. Um, if I chose to have kids, then I simply could not work around the clock the way that I used to. And if I have a chance of making a change in the type of law that I'm going to practice, the next thing that I'm going to be looking for is something that maybe has less landlord tenant and maybe more matrimonial, maybe more T&E. So that was how I geared my next move. When I told the nonprofit that I wasn't returning, and by the way, I still speak to people from that nonprofit agency. It's a great agency. I think it was just my time to go. So I told them, that I wasn't going back, and I really started to focus my networking. Uh, and at that time, things were still in person. This is pre-pandemic, so I really started to work my networking in and around more of a governmental position, something that would bring me into the court system. And I was targeting Supreme because they do matrimonial. I was targeting surrogates court because they do trust and estates. So one thing that I will tell you is no matter what you do, your networking should always be up to par. I have been networking since I was a student. I did it as a student, a fellow, someone who didn't know where they were going, what they were doing, as someone who was figuring it out, then as someone who had more of a clue. Like in all of these phases of my life, I did networking. So when I was sort of angling for a government position, hopefully one within the court system, you sort of draw upon your network contacts. And, I was able to talk to somebody that had already entered the government system, or someone that had, come out of it, but that had something to offer me in terms of advice. So I really drew on that quite a bit in order to give myself an idea of what I should do to prepare. I took interviews that I knew I wouldn't get, but I would know that there was a difficult interviewer because I know that they would grill me. So by the time I got to the interview that might be the most important to me, I was ready for all of your, trick questions. So it did take quite a bit of preparation, but it was well worth it because sometime later, I saw the opening for head of the help center in surrogates court. Brand new position, never existed before. They needed someone who spoke Spanish, not a requirement, but certainly a preference. So I was like, okay, all right, I have a language. And they needed someone they preferred someone who came from a nonprofit profit background. Why? Because people who work for nonprofits have a lot of direct contact with clients. It's nothing but direct contact with clients, and it's a rough client crowd at that. So what I was supposed to do at the Surrogates Court Help Center is basically help people doing one-on-one direct services all day for people who weren't represented, who might not be able to afford an attorney. So it was certainly a transferable skill, and it was the type of background that they were looking for. And then to boot, I had had some trust and estates experience back from my boutique days. So all in all, it made me a strong candidate. I think there was a strong candidate pool, but I was lucky enough to get selected. And then I became the head of the help center, which has worked like a gem here at the Surrogates Court. And then about a year or so ago, I sort of switched a little bit, and I became from being the director at the help center at the courthouse. Now I'm at the director of guardianship, and how that guardianship transition came about. Again, everything is based sort of on my history. I did a lot of 17A guardianships, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. I did a lot of the type of guardianships that I now supervise when I was a practicing attorney at that nonprofit. So a 17A is a guardianship for an incapacitated adult. The adult needs to be born with a disability. So you're thinking maybe like Down syndrome or autism, something like that, not something like dementia that you acquire later in life. So if you're born with a disability, now you turn 18, but the rest of the world doesn't know that you can't make decisions for yourself. Someone needs to do them in your place. That's when you come to this office and you file a 17A, what we call a 17A guardianship. So because I had done that for the vulnerable New York City families that get nonprofit services, that's another thing that made me, I think, a really, really good candidate for the help center, but then to transition here because I was really familiar with the work and I very sort of a little bit more experienced client interaction, you sort of know the kind of headache that the client, well, they're not my clients anymore, but that the family, the patrons come in with when they're at that phase in life that their family member needs the guardianship. So I hope I didn't ramble too much, but I think from being a fresh grad to all of the sort of hiccups I've had and all the steps that I've had, that's how I wound up being a court attorney. So who knows where the road will lead, but this is where I'm at now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It was not long. It was perfect.
Okay, good.
It was great.
Thank you.
So folks, the floor is yours for any questions or answer. To make things smoother, I would advise to raise your hand. That'll be great. I mean, I'll take questions from the chat and alternate, but the floor is yours, folks. So if you want, raise your hand, or if you want, put it in the chat and I'll definitely bring it out. All right, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Hi to the young lady who is speaking, the attorney. I have a question about litigation. So, I do know like students coming right out of law school, in order to litigate, don't you need a certain amount of experience going in? They would require, I gather, what, 3 years or so?
So, not necessarily, there's no statutory or legal requirement for a person to have certain years of experience to litigate. So, it also depends really what type of litigation. So, for example, if you're going to litigate and it's products liability related, there's a squad of attorneys on one case. That case might have 500 plaintiffs or something like that. So, how you get your litigation experience really depends on who hires you. You might be litigation support because you're a fresh grad. And then you might, your tasks might change as you get a little bit less green. And then eventually you're the attorney that is doing oral argument before the judge. So there's different ways to do litigation. I think litigation support is an excellent, a brutally excellent way to learn how to do litigation. And then for nonprofits, sometimes they will train you. They'll give you the basics, and then it's a lot of grunt work, a lot of it takes a lot of time to develop a sophisticated motion practice. But there's no, if that's the question, there's no legal requirement for you to have 3 or 5 years of litigation experience to get a job in litigation.
Awesome, because I asked this question because I know like the JAG program in the military, right off the bat, they teach you how to litigate. And I found that, a lot of students who graduate law school have a hard time landing positions, actually litigating. And I think it's also pretty interesting how nonprofits, they don't have specific niches, so they're like practicing different kind of laws, which is familiar to me as the role of a JAG as well. So basically, I don't necessarily have to become a JAG officer in order to litigate. I can also go the nonprofit route, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think the nonprofit route again, it's the only route I know, right? So that's what I'm talking about. But I think it's good because when you are looking at the kind of family, because it's usually income based, when you're looking at the kind of family that based on their income, they are eligible for nonprofit services, this is the type of client that comes with bundled issues. Their benefits might get cut off. So that's a benefits problem. That's a fair hearing. So you're litigating that. But then because their benefits get cut off, they can't pay their rent. Now they're in housing court. Then you need to litigate that. If you don't have a suitable house for your child and you got a custody issue, now you're also now you have a custody problem. So I've literally had clients where it's just like we've checked off every court. They've had every problem, that the nonprofit could help with because they come with bundled issues. One thing sort of affects the other. And then you have many different layers of litigation. So it's difficult, but that's also an excellent way to learn litigation. It's a lot of motion work. Mm-hmm.
Oh, great question. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Ariana, the floor is yours, and I'll take two questions in the chat after you.
Hi, I just wanted to know what other jobs can you take with a law degree besides being an attorney? And I want to just ask one more question. What fields of law in law school did you think was like the most interesting to study in law school?
Okay, so I'll start with the first question, I guess, since you asked that one first. So what else can you do with a law degree other than practice law? I think that was the first one. So thankfully, a law degree is a very flexible degree, and the type of flexibility that you are looking for sort of depends on your interest. So for example, if you want to be an attorney, but then what you really want to do is open up your own business or corporation or enterprise, then you can do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go out and litigate and take clients the way that I described that I did. What I do think, though, is that you need to have an idea of what your ultimate goal is and then use the law degree to achieve that goal. So if you want to open up your own business, I would consider, working for a corporate law firm or working for a law firm that represents clients who are the kind of business that you want to open. And you stay there for a little while until you get your feet wet, and then you figure out what else is it that you need to be able to accomplish your ultimate goal, which is my hypothetical opening up your own business. So that's one example. But overall, the law degree, I mean, it's very flexible, but whatever it is that you want to practice in, you got to take something that will sort of prepare you for that if your ultimate goal is going to be not to practice the traditional way of, going to court or having your own clients. Does that answer the first question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. And the second question was, I'm sorry, can you remind me?
No, it's okay.
Okay,
I was
mommy
just
brain.
it's okay. I was just asking, your experience in law school, what was like the most interesting law to study? Because I know like you guys like you witnessed like different cases and stuff. So I just wanted to know like what was like the most interesting to you?
To me, the most interesting is what would be the most boring for other people. I took a lot of contract drafting classes because I was so convinced that that's all that I was going to do, of course, when I graduated law school. So I took a lot of contract drafting classes. I've always been a strong writer, and that really makes you very detail prone. It's like you have to learn how to read a contract all over again. That's what I found interesting. Besides contract drafting classes, oh gosh, what else did I take that I thought was interesting? I thought evidence was interesting. I thought evidence was actually very interesting. But other than contract drafting classes, I made sure to take classes on the subjects that were going to be covered in the bar, because it always gives you extra preparation to have taken the class in evidence. If you know evidence is going to be on the bar exam, contract drafting is not. So once you get your core requirements out of the way, what I loved to take was a contract drafting class.
Cool. Thanks.
Mhm.
There's a question here in the chat, but I can answer a little bit of it, but let's see what Erica's take on it. What would be your advice for someone who's in the criminal justice field and has no experience but is working in a different field besides networking? What I can say, what real quick I can say is you need to come visit us. That's our job, to make sure we find that niche for you that best fits. Criminal justice is a very broad field. So just keep that in mind, either make an appointment with myself or other wonderful counselors over at the Career Service Department. Unless you have another take on it, Erica.
So the question is how to network if you're looking for a job in the criminal justice.
The advice is for you is what advice would you give to someone who's working in the criminal justice field and has no experience but is working in a different field besides networking?
Okay, so you're working in a different field, you have no experience. What I would do, actually, I know that it's a little bit different now with the pandemic. There aren't as many in-person events, but if I were in your position, what I would do is I would look up committees, bar associations, networking groups that are tailored to what it is you want to learn about. So let's say you want to learn about being a family law attorney. I would go to the New York State Bar, to the New York City Bar, if you're in New York City, and I would find on their website like the contact person, for their committee, who's the chair of volunteer services, and volunteer for something. And then when you get there, you make sure that you speak to the person that's running the event and you tell them, this is who I am, this is what I'm looking for. Do you know of anybody that can help me? It might not be them. They might not want to, they might not know, but they are being asked something and you are expressing your interest. So what they would likely do if they don't help you themselves is to point you to somebody who might give you some information.
Great. Before I take care of you, Daniel, let me get these two questions out and I'm going to get you right afterwards. One is, do you need a bachelor's degree to become an attorney? And that answer, I'm assuming so. It is correct.
Yes.
You need to get a degree, get your Juris Doctorate in order to practice law or be an attorney. Definitely, I would not hire anyone if I needed an attorney who did not go to law school or is licensed. Here's a good question. Yes.
Hi, I'm on the phone, Roger. So if you have a public administration degree and you're considering law, what's the best route to go? Sorry.
Law school. Yeah.
Yeah, what's the best route to go? Law school, like, how would you go about that? I know CUNY has something about pipeline, CUNY pipeline to law, I guess. I heard about that some years ago when I was studying.
Yes, with that said, I can answer real quickly on that. We're going to have a graduate fair in November. So we're going to have schools, graduate schools, either be from all walks of life. Graduate school is pretty broad, but we definitely will have schools that pertain to law, have law schools. So definitely be on the lookout for that. That will be early November. So just be aware of that and start doing some research. I mean, definitely to cultivate that. And again, make an appointment with us. Definitely that's a good ship to start going into. So before I get into Daniel, let me answer this question and get this question because it's a good question. Do you think internships undergrad benefit your law school application process? I'm looking to go to law school after undergrad, but I don't have any internships or legal work experience.
So if the question is, and I do have a tendency of repeating the question to make sure that I understand. So it's very lawyerly and obnoxious, but it does help me actually make sure that I'm answering your question. So the question is if an undergraduate internship helps with your application to law school?
Yes. I'm getting here because the student does not have any experience or internships or legal work experience.
I think that nothing hurts for you to go to law school. So whatever it is that if at this point you're applying to law school and you have what you have, then it's done. You'll figure out, what you need to do after your first year of law school. First year of law school, I wouldn't suggest taking on too much because it's a heavy first year. and you're taking it from someone who took it part-time, so it's still heavy. I think that it certainly does help if you have experience working maybe in a legal office or something like that, but don't get too hung up over it, because you're not going to necessarily learn law or think more like an attorney until you've gone to law school. So they're not looking for you to be a lawyer before you become a lawyer. They're just looking to see what type of commitments you've made before you commit to law school. What kind of, firm did you work for? What kind of company did you work for? What was it that you did? Did you work with people? Are you an office person? So they're trying to get more a sense of your capacity and how well you function. They're not testing you on whether or not you know law. That's what you're going to pay them to do, or do it on scholarship. So, there is a difference there.
Excellent. Daniel, you had a question? Just want to make sure I get to you before I get to the chat.
Yeah, Miss Gomez, my apologies. I lost connection. However, you was telling me a little bit about intersections between practices. So what is that practice that would allow me, to wear many hats, or, learn many things?
So, more than a practice, I think it would be where it is that you choose to work. So, as I've said before, the nonprofit sector, any type of, like legal aid, nonprofit, there's a million different types of nonprofit. Something like that would have you wear many hats, because, they are funding dependent, so they can't have a family law department and a benefits department. So it's one attorney gets assigned the case, and if your client has if it's the type of client that has a problem in 12 areas of the law, if you're funded to do it, you're going to have to learn those 12 things. So, and how they interconnect, which is really the beauty of it. So I think that if you did take a position with a nonprofit as a staff attorney, regular staff attorney, and do that for a couple of years, that's how you really learn how to wear many hats.
That's where you really learn how to apply the law as well, I gather.
Yeah.
I thank you for your time.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Here's a question. I'll try to rephrase it. Student wants to like to be a legal assistant, but has no experience or certification. And what would be the best way to get a legal job with none of those experience?
The best way to get a legal job when you don't have any experience, I think it would be to network, and make sure that you get your resume professionally reviewed.
Yes.
I actually, there you go. There you go. I'm selling it. So I think that would be key. As a professional that already had a resume where it clearly indicated that I was an attorney, I took mine to a colleague so it could be ramped up, and so it could be sort of more tailored as to what it is I wanted to do, in addition to explaining what it is that I had already done. So I would say make sure that your resume is sharp, and also do a lot of networking. And you will find out that there are a lot of people that are willing to hire. And if you, are the type that you're willing to put in the commitment, they will train you, and you will learn. I don't necessarily think it's a problem to present a resume with no prior experience in a very particular area. What I think you need to do is highlight what kind of transferable skill you have. It might be a different topic than what you've done before, but it involves dealing with a lot of people. Okay, so then you make sure that you highlight that you have a lot of experience working with many people. You need to, I think, hone in on what's the transferable skill and sell it that way.
Yeah. There's another question. This is an interesting one. How long does it take to complete all of school? I have some courses in real estate, police, etc. Does that get transferred over in law school? If these are undergrad courses, no. That I could attest to. In terms of finishing, it varies from person to person. I think, Erica, you have your experience going part-time. Full-time, you're looking at about, quote me if I'm wrong, 7 years, about undergrad and grad combined, could be longer. But
Mhm.
I mean, Erica, you can talk about your experience. I am assuming part-time while.
Well, I did the 4 years of undergrad.
Okay.
And then after I did the 4 years of undergrad, like I said, I went straight into law school. But because I wasn't 100% sure, I started in the part-time division. And then at the end of the year, I realized that, yeah, this is what I want to do. So I took up the classes that I was missing over the summer. And then second year, I was a full-time student. So I did law school in the regular 3 years. If you're going to do the part-time curriculum, then I think it's 4 years. So the 4 of undergrad plus the 3 of law school is 7. And if you're going to do part-time because you work or you have children, or, you have a life, then it's 4 plus 4.
Cool.
Not too bad.
Yeah,
It's really not too
it's
bad.
not too bad. So, well, I think this question is a bit self-explanatory. Do you think it's crucial to get into law school? Well, if you want to be an attorney, yes.
It's a requirement, yeah.
Yeah, it's a requirement. Any advice if you still don't know the type of law you want to study?
I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that most of the people, myself included, that go to law school thinking that they're going to do one thing, wind up doing another. And then to boot, like I said, when I graduated at 2008, everybody that had been promised their fancy firm job for the first year, after they graduated, it fell apart because we had a financial crisis and you couldn't afford those people anymore, or you got deferred for a year and then they said, sorry. So people were really forced to rethink their next steps. So I don't think it's a problem for you not to know. I don't think it's a problem at all. If anything, it makes you, I think, a little bit more adventurous into trying different things. But ultimately, I do think that you can discover what you like more in law school after taking a couple of courses. And even if you decide on one thing and you take a particular job, like I said, try to find something where you can do something particular, maybe develop a specialized skill, but that doesn't close you off to everything else. And then you'll have I don't think you really know. I'm sorry if I ramble too much, but I don't think you really know until you've gone to law school and had that first job when you're really practicing as to how much you're really gonna like what you thought you did. And it's a great experience because then you go into your next step a little bit more solidly, a little bit more grown up when you take that next step.
Cool. Before I get to you, Daniel, let me get one more question in the chat. What are some of the best places to start looking if you want to get internships or experience for a specific field you're already interested in?
Sure. So if it's a field that you're already interested in, I would do networking to meet professionals already in that field. So a good place that I used to do was always the bar association because they had 1,000,001 committees. They had committees for young attorneys, which I classified at that time. They had attorneys, committees for people that were interested in a particular area. Everyone else in that group is going to be interested, just like you, in the same topic. And the heads of those groups are going to have a lot of information. They might know if there's an internship available. They know somebody who might be able to make a link that way. So I think bar associations are huge. I think that you can do volunteer services with any type of organization that you're interested in, and that can also be a good connection, even if they're not an attorney.
All right, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Ms. Gomez, so I was looking at a credible site on statistics, like the demand for lawyers, and I found that it's competitive to like really land a job right out of law school. Would it be keen to like getting maybe like specializing in taxation in order to really be profitable and kind of like be able to do what you want to practice in terms of, you know, getting hired at a specific firm or nonprofit?
So I always think that a tax, and I think you're talking more like a tax LLM, that's an extra sort
Right.
of, right, like a specialized degree on top of the JD, which still sort of goes along with it. That's always a good idea. I mean, everyone hates taxes, which is exactly why. If you want to have an audience, you might want to specialize in taxes. That's fine because it's a very specialized area. So when you really need an expert, you cannot replace the need for that with something else. So there is a market for tax, and tax usually is accompanied with something else. It's not tax alone. So so I certainly don't think it's a bad idea. Personally, I'm not one for taxes, so I don't have an LLM degree or any kind of specialization in tax. But it's always a good idea, and they always tell you that it's very competitive. It's not that it's not competitive. And again, I hit a bit of a soft spot because of the year that I graduated, but even in 4 months, I was able to find something. I went to a staffing agency for attorneys. Like I found something, and then when they see, that your work quality is good, they asked me to stay. It was supposed to be a temporary position. So it doesn't mean necessarily that opportunities aren't out there.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Thank
Thank you, Dan. Here's a two-part question. How is the course load in law school, and is it manageable if you have a full-time job?
So I think it is manageable if you have a full-time job, but more manageable if you're a part-time student. Most of the people that I knew who had a full-time job that they did not give up remained part-time students. So remember, I started part-time and then transferred to full-time. So I had some part-time friends, and then I had my full-time friends, and it was all fine. But the ones that did not transfer over, like me, were usually the ones that had a full-time job that they were not willing to give up. And they were typically students that were a little older than myself. There's a reason they weren't giving up that job. Or ones that had, families to support and that type of very normal thing. As for the workload, oh God, let me see if I remember this. The first year, they work you to death. The second, no. The first year, they scare you to death. The second year, they work you to death. And the third year, they bore you to death. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight. So when you're learning how to read all over again as an attorney, it is very time consuming. The workload is intense. So it does take a lot of time. You should not become estranged to family and friends. At the end of the day, this is important, but you need to sort of have a little bit of perspective. There will be time for other things, but there won't be time for much. So it is possible. You just need to figure out what type of schedule is going to work for you. And then when the time comes to study for the bar, your employer should, I don't know if they're required to, but they are allowed to, especially if you work for a law firm, they will give you time off to study for the bar.
Question. Renata, I hope I pronounced that right. The floor is yours.
Hello. Hi, Ms. Gomez.
Hi.
So I'm very curious, in terms of minor, is there a specific minor you would recommend when applying for law school? My major is actually criminal justice, but I'm indecisive when it pertains to like selecting my minor.
No, I was a French minor. And it's not related to law degree in the sense that I'm not a lawyer in France and I'm not a lawyer in Louisiana either. I didn't do civil code. It's just New York bar and New Jersey bar. But why do I think a French minor was a good idea for law school? French is not a native language for me. It's not something that I grew up speaking. I started it when I was 14. But you have to pay attention to writing and to reading and to rules of grammar. That is exactly what it is that you're supposed to do in English, and that is exactly what you're supposed to do when you read a case. Why does the period matter? Why does the period not matter? The whole point is that the language makes you think. Thinking is hard, and you're going to have to do a lot of it when you get to law school. So I think that learning how to read, compose a thought, make sure that it's understandable to your audience in a language that is not yours actually makes you think in a similar way to the way you're going to have to learn to think in law school, which means that your choice of a minor can really be very flexible. A language minor can be fine. I saw people do it in, political science. I had people who did English major and communications minors that went to law school, and they did fine. And I was an English major. So it's all about language, and how to read and write. Like, it's got to be sharp, because it's only got to get sharper when you go to law school.
Thank you.
Well, here's a question. LSAT's programs would you would refer to help prepare for the exam? One is we have the Pre-Law Institute program, folks, on your doorstep, and it's free. So that's one place to definitely go to the Pre-Law Institute to find and gather more information, because those LSAT prep courses are free. Do you have any suggestions, Erica?
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember which one I used. Now I'm starting to feel old. Was it PRBA? Actually, I don't know. I don't even know if they exist anymore. I do remember paying for it though, as we didn't have a lot of free options back then. But maybe it was Kaplan, or maybe it was like a competitor of Kaplan. Not this. There are new ones that exist that didn't exist back in that day. But I think that usually the ones that are known to be good they're all sort of similar. Like the technique that they, the formula they give you that's automatically going to have you pass this LSAT. The one program is really not that different from another. But I don't think that there's any wrong way to go. I think it just comes to practicing and understanding that exam, which has nothing to do with like a law school exam, but you have to learn how to take an exam. So, I don't really think that there's a bad course that's one of the popular ones that we know now.
Here's a good one. How do you know if you're meant to be a lawyer? If the law is really for you? Like, it was more a philosophical question.
Yeah.
I like it.
I like it too. Actually, it's a very good question. I don't know that I can answer that for anybody, because I don't know you and you don't know me. So I think that if you like a degree that's flexible, a law school degree is a good option. You don't necessarily need to be a people person. You don't necessarily need to be a party person. I think that there is room to find your niche and room for your personality wherever you are in that spectrum with a law degree. But how do you know that it's for you? I started part-time because I really just wasn't sure if it was the right commitment for me. So I don't know that there is necessarily a guaranteed way to know, but you can always read about what it is that attorneys within particular areas of the law do. There's got to be like a million blogs of like litigators, and you can look up, what certain rules are, even just from attorney law firm websites, and see if that tells you something about yourself.
Good question. Nice response. Just for you folks in the chat are asking about the Pre-Law Institute. I put it on the chat where to gather more information. One did ask, which is a good question. Do you need a minor? And what was it? Do you need a minor? And is it possible to study on your own the LSATs?
I don't know that you need a minor to necessarily go to law school. You need all the, the general stuff like solid GPA and all of that stuff. I don't think a minor is a bad idea, but I don't know that you necessarily need one, especially if it's cases that where people double major. I didn't do that. I did one major, one minor. So if you double major, you want to leave some brain cells left when you get to law school. But I didn't know one person that even triple majored. Oh, for God's sakes. So, it's not necessary, but I don't know that you need one. But you have a little bit of flexibility in this phase of your life when you're picking majors and minors. So pick something that will stimulate your thinking. I think that's the bottom line. As for studying for the LSAT on your own, there are a few unicorns out there that do it and might be fine. I'm not a unicorn, never was, never will be. So I certainly needed the discipline and the strategy. I needed a program to teach me the strategy to the exam, and to teach me the strategy with timing, because I'm a slow reader, and I don't think that that's a problem. I'm very proud of it, but you need to learn how to take the exam, and then you need to also, there's the element of timing. Until the end of days, it's going to be an issue. So I think a program is not a bad way to learn how to do that. I would recommend a program, unless you're a unicorn.
So, folks, thank you so much for question and answers here. And I want to give a round of applause and thank Erica for dedicating her time. Again, there'll be many more of these type of series, so look out. We will have one next month, so not going to tell you. So I want you folks to look at John Jay Careers and sign up. And don't forget our career fair next week. But again, shout out to Erica. Thank you so much for taking the time.
You're very welcome.
And thank you all folks for coming. And again, thanks to everyone, and take care. Stay safe out there. And Erica, if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out.